Something like this is very, very important to people.
And we're always up for a laugh on this show.
God, honestly, you'd think there were no problems in the world.
Real Britain, every Saturday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Hello and welcome to GB News. I'm Angela Rippon and I'm sitting in today for Alastair while he takes what I'm sure is a very well-deserved break. I'm going to be keeping you company here on TV and radio for the next 2 hours with the sort of stories that really matter to every one of us all over the country. Now, among other things, we're going to be taking a look back at Rishi Sunak's first week as Prime Minister, of course, plus the call for a snap election in Northern Ireland, what actually happens between now and then, and how the cost of living crisis is affecting relationships. We've got all of that and a lot more to come. But first, let's get the latest news with Alice Porter.
Good afternoon. It's midday. I'm Alice Porter in the GB newsroom. A whistleblower at an asylum processing centre in Kent has told GB News the government is not acknowledging the true extent of the crisis there. The worker at the Manston military base claims violence, disease and attempts of self-harm are a daily occurrence at the facility. The processing centre is only supposed to hold asylum seekers for no more than 24 hours before transferring them to longer-term accommodation. But many have allegedly been there weeks in unsuitable living conditions. Former Chief Immigration Officer Kevin Saunders says the problem lies with the legislation.
80% of people coming across the channel are from Albania. And we do have legislation, of course, that we can remove them. However, and here's the problem, the people that advise these refugees are saying, just say to the UK authorities that you've been trafficked, because once you've said that, they can't remove you.
The head of the Royal Navy has ordered an investigation into what he's called abhorrent allegations of sexual assault and harassment in the submarine service. Admiral Sir Ben Key says the behaviour will not be tolerated and is not a true reflection of what service life should be. He says anyone who is found culpable will be held accountable, regardless of their rank or status. The Foreign Secretary says countries need to work together to starve terrorists of money and technology. Addressing a United Nations meeting in India, James Cleverly urged allied states to tackle terror groups' use of technology to recruit and radicalise people. He called for more pressure to be put on big tech companies.
We're also working with the G7 and Global Internet Forum to counter terrorism. And we continue to press tech companies, amongst whom are some of the internet's biggest players, to crack down even harder on extremist content online.
Russia has declared the end of its Ukraine mobilisation campaign. The defence minister told President Putin that the target of 300,000 people had been met and they will now stop deploying reservists to fight. The controversial move led to tens of thousands of Russian men fleeing the country. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says he doubts Moscow is done with calling up soldiers. Octopus Energy will buy collapse supplier Bulb after the deal was given the green light by the government. Octopus says it's paying the government above market value to take on the company's 1.5 million customers. Business Secretary Grant Shapps says the move brings vital reassurance and energy security to consumers across the country at a time when they need it most. The deal is expected to be completed by the end of next month. President Biden has labelled the attack on US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband as despicable. Police say Paul Pelosi was violently assaulted with a hammer at their California home yesterday morning. The 82-year-old has undergone surgery for a skull fracture as well as injuries to his right arm and hand. He's expected to make a full recovery. The suspect was arrested and was also taken to hospital. Railway staff in Scotland are staging a 24-hour walkout over a pay dispute. More than 2,000 members of the RMT union are striking, and passengers are being warned to expect widespread disruption. ScotRail says the latest offer gives the lowest paid staff a basic pay increase of almost 7.5%. But the union is calling for a rise that's more in line with inflation. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Angela.
You know, it's really hard to believe that it was just over a week ago that Liz Truss was still the UK's Prime Minister. But, you know, events developed at warp speed, and Rishi Sunak triumphed over his rivals to become the leader of the Conservative Party and pledged to reverse the mistakes that had been made by those before him. Now, he was crowned the leader of the party while the leader of the House of Commons, Penny Mordaunt, struggled to gather the 100 MPs needed to get through to the ballot. And although Boris Johnson claimed that there was much support for him to return to number 10, he actually bowed out, saying that it was simply not the right time. So, Rishi Sunak it is. And the first job when he entered number 10 was to put together his cabinet. Well, he immediately faced criticism from some MPs after he brought back Suella Braverman as Home Secretary. Now, Braverman resigned from her post after using her personal email address to forward sensitive government documents, breaking the rules by which ministers have to abide. Now, Rishi has stuck by his decision, even though Chris Bryant, who's the chairman of the Standards Committee, has said that she was a liability. And indeed, according to some backbenchers, she's just an accident waiting to happen. So did he make the right decision? Well, the week also saw some U-turns as he decided to scrap a Tory leadership campaign pledge to fine patients in England £10 if they missed their GP or hospital appointments. And sticking with the NHS, he was confronted by a patient on nurses' pay. She told, dear old lady she was, she told him that the new MP during his visit to the hospital that he needs to do a lot more to make sure that nurses are paid a proper wage. Well, the Tory party has faced huge criticism since the summer for its divisions and lack of stability. But can Rishi Sunak put all of that to bed and actually unite the party? Well, our GB News poll suggests that views on Rishi Sunak remain divided. We've got some 30% of people saying that they are favourable towards the Prime Minister, 40% saying they are not, although he is at least more popular than his predecessor Liz Truss, and in some trails he does trail behind Labour and Keir Starmer. But all of that and this is just his first week. One does wonder why anyone on earth would ever want to be Prime Minister, doesn't it? Well, we've got an awful lot to unpack today, and we've got just the right people to help. We're going to be speaking to grassroots members, to MPs and political commentators, and we're also going to be taking a look at another problem that's in Rishi's in tray, and that's the Northern Ireland elections. And away from politics, how can we help you save money during the cost of living crisis? We've got it all. And as always, we would love to hear from you. So do send us your views or questions on the stories that we're covering today. It's very simple. It's gbviews at GBNews UK. Well, as you can see, we've got quite an agenda today. And joining me in the studio this lunchtime is political commentator Lettuce Bromovsky. Lettuce, a week is an awful long time in politics. And Richie's had his feet under the table at number 10. What, for one day less than a week?
Yeah, completely.
What do you make of his work so far?
I would say the general consensus so far is that this first week has gone well, but there's no denying that this is the sort of honeymoon stage of his premiership. And essentially, people will be looking at this. He's saying a lot of words at the moment, but it's the actions that people are waiting to see. We can see, like you said, the polls, they've taken a jump this week. There are those immediate things you can see. Also, the pound is very strong at the moment, 1.16 against the dollar, so that's doing very well. But there have also been these sudden U-turns and his cabinet reshuffle, which has a lot of people a bit confused, perhaps, because it didn't change much from the previous prime ministership of Liz Truss. And there are people in there that I'm not quite sure how they've managed to get into the cabinet. Nadeem Zahawi in particular. This was a man who actually took Rishi's job back in the summer, quite notoriously went in when Boris Johnson's sinking ship was going down, and then literally just last weekend was very publicly backing Boris Johnson again. But as soon as Boris backed out of that race, he very quickly turned around again and stuck his flag on the mast of Rishi Sunak. I think that's particularly untrustworthy.
But that's politics, isn't it? You want to back a winner.
Well, completely. And as you were saying earlier with Suella Braverman, we're exactly seeing these political games at play again. I think the appointment of Suella Braverman is entirely a strategic one to try and bring together, or at least have representatives from all these different factions of the Conservative parties around Rishi Sunak.
But I mean, why did he have to choose her? I mean, he obviously doesn't want to prove that he's in hock to the far right of the party. There were other people on the far right he could have chosen. And I see on the front page of the newspaper today, Rishi Sunak is facing growing calls to sack the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, before purging the party of the influence of Boris Johnson and right-wing supporters.
I think that's using a bit of a hyperbolic language, I would say. I don't think that Rishi is going to sack her. I mean, he's only just appointed the woman.
Yeah.
I do see why there would be some tensions. This is our Home Secretary, the woman who is meant to be looking after our country, security, the police force. And The Times actually released an article last week that said this isn't the first time she's been caught sending personal emails from her personal email address, And in fact, she also did it when she was the Attorney General.
Yeah.
I think it's particularly embarrassing for her that MI5 is stepping in to give her a lesson on how to handle her briefing documents.
But there's also a question as to whether or not MI5 feel that they can trust her.
Yes,
But
they have come out.
Position for a Home Secretary to be in.
Completely. It's the wrong image to be putting out there. They have said that they do trust her, what level that is. The fact of the matter is they have to trust her. She is the Home Secretary going forward. And I think that one of the reasons she has been appointed is she's quite tough, and a lot of the Conservative voters quite like that. The Rwanda plan, although I don't think that's the right direction or the direction they'll be going in anymore, too much time, too much money, too much opposition, when actually now they're looking towards the general election and they need to win those votes. However, we see on the front page of the Times a new deal coming forward, talking with France. This is where we need to be. This is entirely the right area that we want to be in. The real way we can stop this is through proper communication, and that's where Liz Truss was so bad.
It is brilliant, actually, isn't it? Because apparently Sunak has already been talking to Macron, and they've got a very good relationship going.
Exactly, and we only have to cast our minds back a mere few weeks when Liz Truss was in the leadership contest, and she said, so embarrassingly, she was asked a question by someone, Emmanuel Macron, friend or foe, I think was the question, and she said, oh, the jury's still out. You know, all the laughs, the laughs. But this isn't funny. No. This is real people's lives of those people who are crossing this channel to get here. This is our country our services having to deal with what's expected to be around 40,000 people coming in by the end of the year. We can't handle this, and I think the solution's much closer than we think.
We're going to be talking about it a little bit later in the programme. But the other bear trap that he's fallen into is saying he's not going to go to COP27 and he's not going to let the king go either. Do you think he's made a mistake there?
No, I don't. I think it's the right decision for him not to go. We have the autumn budget, which has been pushed back from this Monday to the 17th of November. COP27 runs from the 6th of November to the 18th of November. He needs to be here in the UK planning around this, helping Jeremy Hunt, his Chancellor, push forward on this, how we're going to fill this £50 billion black hole. And although COP27 is a wonderful event and I support it, this isn't the first time a Prime Minister hasn't gone. And in fact, in Labour's 13 years when they were ruling over this country, one of their Prime Ministers only went once. So it's not as shocking. I think it's a bit of a storm in a teacup. And with Charles isn't Prince Charles anymore. He is now King Charles. And one of the moves when he transitioned from that role, from Prince to King, was that he would take a step back from politics, essentially. He wouldn't keep putting his foot in it, like he did with the Rwanda plan, actually. And he would, I think COP is a very political event. You know, environmental policy, that's politics, and I think it's right that he's not there.
But he could always do a Zoom into it, couldn't he?
Well, yeah, he definitely could. But again, I think it's just best that
step back.
Yeah, he's got too much going on, and I think a Zoom. I mean, we've all been on Zoom over COVID, but the real changes happen when you're in a room together. You have proper conversation. There's no lags or Wi-Fi problems or whatever issues you might have. The real change happens when you get together in a room.
Now, you were not a Richie Sunak fan. You did not back him, did you?
Not at all.
Very briefly, have you changed your opinion?
No, not yet. I'm not 100% not against him. I was 100% against Boris Johnson coming in. And so, frankly, we are in a situation where he is not as divisive as Boris Johnson and he's not as impulsive as Liz Truss. There's no doubt that I think he can do well, and maybe he is the unity and the safe figure we need. But, you know, he's got to prove himself.
Still out there, Lex.
Yeah, the jury's still out. Exactly.
Well, political commentator Lettuce Bromovsky there, and she's going to stay with me, actually, and she'll be back a little bit later in the programme. But let's now get the opinion from the grassroots on Richie Sunak, because joining me now is Don Williams. Don is the chairman of Hampstead and Kilburn Conservatives. Thanks so much for joining us, Don.
Thank you.
Now, I know that you were backing Liz Truss, weren't you? You weren't that particularly in favour of Richie Sunak. So now, do you think, with hindsight, that you got the vote wrong and the MPs have now got it right?
Well, you know, with time, things change. I'm looking forward to the future. Liz Truss is no longer, let's say, in the race. And we need unity, and we need things to work going forward. And I don't think I was wrong at the time, but I think it's right now important to trust and to look for a candidate that will unify the party.
Well, you say look for a candidate. You've got a candidate who says he's going to unify the party. Are you saying you've still got questions and doubts as to whether or not he's going to be able to do it?
No, I'm not saying that really. What I'm saying is that we're not in August 2022. We're in October and almost November. We now know a lot more than we knew before. And it's pretty obvious from the voting in Parliament that he's a candidate to unify the people in Parliament, and also to address the issues that we've got going forward. So this is really what I'm saying. You know, he's the right man for the time, and the time has changed.
So what do your constituents think? I mean, presumably you're talking to members on a daily basis. What do they think?
As in everything in life, we have constituents with different opinions. Some are happy, some are not. Rishi Sunak actually did come to us in, I think it was late July, early August, and spoke to lots of people. We had 200 people come out to see him. So we have lots of candidates lots of members from before who were really happy to see him and were really supporters. So, and we had people who were supporting Liz. I think that's true of every association. And I'm obviously I'm not telling you anything new, but if you see the pictures in late July, August, of the people who surrounded Rishi, and in fact I had a picture with him, it was jubilation. So there's no way I can tell you he didn't have support here. He had lots of support here.
Yeah, I mean, I think what is interesting is that I saw a quote which said that 57% of Conservative voters actually think that it was a mistake to get rid of Boris.
Well, if I'm to, you see, I'm not going to agree completely with Lettuce Bromovsky. I also heard lots of members who were in jubilation when Boris flew back on that. Was it Sunday or Monday? Yeah. So, but people are realistic in our association.
Yeah.
And they want something. They want people to get the job done and to unify us. You know.
All right. Well, let me ask you, Don. Let me just ask you, because the Conservatives are now trailing in the polls. What do you, as a Conservative association and as a chairman, want to see Rishi Sunak doing to guarantee that you might do a lot better in the next general election than people are at the moment giving him credit for?
Angela, I knew you'd ask me this question. So I have.
Then you've got your answer ready.
You know, what we want is a unified a unified government and a government with the talent. And I think he's done the right thing in picking, well, a lot of people jump up and down and say Suella Braverman wasn't the right person. But quite frankly, you need to pick people from the right of the party. So if we can say the right of the party, the center of the party, and to the left of the party, whatever that means, because it doesn't mean much. We're a party who is right of center, so it's gradations. But we needed all the talents across the different wings of the party. Then secondly, in terms of policy, I mean, I was really, really elated when I heard it's a smaller black hole than we thought. So therefore, we can actually do things to help people. We can actually promote business. And I'm sure with his background, he understands that very clearly, that we need more investment and we need businesses to have less weight on their shoulders going forward. And that's really what I'd like to see. I'd like to see people who are working given the chance to confront the cost of living crisis that we have at the moment. Now, it's great to also see that gas prices have started to come down on the wholesale market. So, and certainly petrol prices have come down. And so we want people to choose how, and Angela, I really love your shows across the channels, let's put it that way, where you help people to save and you look at people who, should I say, rogue players, and people need to shop differently. They need to, people know that. We have Kilburn High Road on our corner, and you can see people shopping differently in order to get the bargains. They go to Waitrose, they understand at Waitrose there are own labels, or at Sainsbury's. Sorry, I shouldn't be giving any
giving them a free advert there, Dom. I said you're giving him a free advert there, but never mind, because I think what you've done is you've collectively described what you would like to see Rishi Sunak doing, and I think everyone keeping their fingers crossed that he's going to live up to your expectations. Thanks ever so much for that, because I want now to talk to a sitting Conservative MP, because that was Don Williams. He's the chairman of Hampstead and Kilburn, but joining me now is Bob Seeley, who's Conservative MP for the Isle of Wight. Bob, thank you so much for joining us. Now, you are also somebody who was supporting Liz Truss and not Rishi Sunak. Has he got your vote now? Are you going to get behind him?
That's not quite true. Actually, my first choice in the summer was Penny, and I consistently supported Penny this time round as well. So I was very much a Penny backer, and Penny would have made a great Prime Minister, but I think Rishi is actually also going to make a great Prime Minister as well. I think he's made a great start. Can I just correct something that you said, Angela?
Yes.
Very nice to see you and your listeners. We don't have the far right. Somebody said the far right in the Conservatives. We have Conservatives in the Conservative Party.
I was quoting the front page of the Eye today, which is referring to the far right, and indeed some of your own MPs have referred to the far right.
Yes. That's left-wing commentators, and they can say what we want, but we don't have the far right in the Conservative Party, so let me just correct that.
Yeah, but do you believe that Rishi is the man who is actually going to bring, whatever faction you are, is going to bring everybody in the Conservative Party, not just in the House of Commons, but also in the country, bring you all together?
Yes, I do. Look, I think Penny and Rishi would have done very similar things, and I think Rishi is being very sensible. He's bringing together, I'm not sure we have factions. I'd like to put it, we have different voices. You have Conservatives, and you have more sort of right of the party and the left of the party. For sure. Is Rishi going to bring them together? Yes. And frankly, the mistakes in the Boris government, and sadly probably in the Liz government as well, was there wasn't enough of an attempt to make sure different voices were heard. And I think one of the things that Rishi has got right, one of the many things that Rishi has got right this week, is the fact that he's making sure that that there are different groups within the party and different voices, and we've got those reflected in his cabinet. So I think from that point of view, I think it's been a fantastic start.
Yeah. How do you think he's going to deal with people like Rees-Mogg and others who are now on the back benches? Do you think they're going to cause trouble for him, or are party members in general, are Conservative MPs in general, just going to say, look, lay off, let's give them a go?
I think in general, what I hope is that there isn't going to be this sort of personality factionalism, and I see no evidence that there might be in that. I'm very much hoping we don't have that, because I think for me there are really important arguments to be had over policy, like, for example, planning. Like, for example, how we deal with Russia in future, how we deal with building up a cross-government attitude towards China. So there are significant policy issues that we need to be discussing and agreeing on. And for people to be getting involved in those from the backbenches, I think is entirely laudable, because those are the sort of issues that we need to be talking about real politics again. We need to be moving away from who leads our party. That matter, I have no doubt, is now settled. Rishi will lead us into the election. And I think increasingly, what you're saying is correct. There are going to be some increasingly difficult choices to make. But I think as Rishi makes those choices, it's going to become increasingly evident that he's the right man to lead us. And I think for Keir Starmer, the future is not looking bright. But I think for us, once we get through this difficult 6 months, difficult year, difficult 18 months, for however long the energy inflation and cost of living spike happen, I think increasingly people will put their trust back in Rishi and the Conservatives. And I'm incredibly confident, actually. That's not to assume there aren't some big and difficult decisions coming. There are.
That's what I want to ask you about, because Dom there was just telling me the things that he would like to see Rishi Sunak do to bring the party together and to actually, live up to the expectations that everybody has of him. What do you want to see him doing that would ensure that in the next general election you'll keep your seat there on the Isle of Wight?
Well, I hope I'm going to keep my seat, because I'm a very hard-working constituency MP, and I've delivered more than £120 million of additional investment into the island's infrastructure, in the NHS and transport, in shipbuilding in East Cowes and elsewhere. So I have a very strong track record here, which I'm hoping is going to make sure that I'm okay, but I take nothing for granted. Rishi has to deal with the immediate crisis, and then towards the next election, wherever possible, he needs to get taxes down. And I think the one thing that Don was saying, one of the many things he was saying that was spot on, is that we need to remember our voter base. So Rishi needs to remember the folks in Southampton, where he came from, as I'm sure he's going to, the small businesses. He needs to be supporting those wealth creators, those entrepreneurs in our society. But also, this is the pharmacists and the doctors and the GPs, and making sure they can be doing their jobs, treating people as well. So there are there's a lot of sensible, moderate reform that we can be doing to make sure our country runs better, to make sure our public services run better, but also ensuring that our businessmen and entrepreneurs, businesswomen, can actually create the wealth that we need to pay for all the good things in our society. But this week, I'm incredibly confident of what's going to be happening in our future, notwithstanding these significant decisions we need to get through in the next 18 months.
Sufficiently confident to be able to say that you think that Rishi Sunak is the man who will take the Conservatives through to a win at the next general election?
Oh, I think it's all to play for. People writing off us now. Look, 3 years ago, we were set for a decade in government, and then this summer, it was all sort of disaster. Look, we've had a period of instability. The end of Boris, Liz's short-term in government sadly went too far too fast. Some really good supply-side ideas, and now we've got Rishi. Rishi is going to lead us into the next election. There is no doubt about that. We are now a united party again. For those people who think the dramas and the psychodramas and the soap opera is going to continue, it ain't. We're done. We're now back to normal politics, and there's a very, very big and serious in tray, whether it's the energy crisis, the inflation spike, the cost of living, the war in Ukraine, all the things that we need to do to stabilise the public finances. So we've got to we're getting back to serious, normal politics, which I think many of us welcome, and I welcome, because it means that there are ministers that are going to be in place in the next 6 months, in the next year, in the next 18 months. So when I'm writing to them about the need for a new special needs school on the Isle of Wight, I know that the minister I'm dealing with this month is going to be the minister I'm dealing with in 6 months who's going to give me that project. When I'm talking about the repair of Ryde Railway Bridge, which is now, Ryde Railway Pier, which is going to be starting very soon, I know which minister to invite down next spring. We're going to have stable government, which is very good for people like me, because it means I can deliver for my folks on the island, and other constituents MPs can be battling to deliver for their constituents up and down the country.
Bob, thank you very much indeed. So no more pantomime, proper politics, and I think not just MPs but the public in general will welcome that. Thank you very much indeed. Bob Seeley there, the Conservative MP for the Isle of Wight, joining us. A reminder that you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, but with me, Angela Rippon. And there's lots more coming up on today's show. Northern Ireland Secretary Chris Heaton-Harris has announced that there's going to be a snap assembly election. Next week, he's going to make that announcement, and it comes after politicians missed the deadline that was set by Westminster for restoring the devolved government. We're going to have more on that next. But first, let's take a look at the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking wet across many central and some western areas, but mostly fine elsewhere. Let's take a look at the details. The north of Scotland will stay dry with some sunshine. It will turn breezy, but temperatures will reach a mild 15 Celsius, 59 Fahrenheit. Rain will affect more southern parts of Scotland. And Northern Ireland will also be shrouded in thicker cloud with some rain at times, accompanied by quite a keen and gusty wind. A similar setup is expected across the north of England, and though here the rain should begin to ease a little from the south. There'll still be some showery weather across the north of Wales and a sometimes brisk wind too, but skies will be trying to brighten up and temperatures will widely be in the upper teens. The weather's looking a lot quieter across the East Midlands. It will be a dry afternoon and it will feel quite warm thanks to some hazy sunshine and despite the southerly breeze. The sunshine looks more prolonged across East Anglia with less cloud around, and the wind will be that bit lighter, making for quite a warm afternoon for this time of year. It will be a dry afternoon across southern England as well, and in the sunshine, temperatures could nudge into the low 20s Celsius, which is around the 70 Fahrenheit mark. Rain will move into northern Scotland this evening. Elsewhere, there'll be clear spells and 1 or 2 showers, and that's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
It's just gone 12:30. I'm Alice Porter in the GB newsroom. A whistleblower at an asylum processing centre in Kent has told GB News the government is not acknowledging the true extent of the crisis there. The worker at the Manston military base claims violence, disease and attempts of self-harm are a daily occurrence at the facility. The processing centre is only supposed to hold asylum seekers for no more than 24 hours before transferring them to longer-term accommodation. But many have allegedly been there for weeks in unsuitable living conditions. Meanwhile, at least 12 small boats carrying 500 people have been intercepted crossing the English Channel so far today. Authorities are still actively responding to other sightings. Border Force vessels and lifeboats are taking them to Dover. They'll then be transferred to the Manston military base in Kent for processing. The head of the Royal Navy has ordered an investigation into what he's called abhorrent allegations of sexual assault and harassment in the submarine service. Admiral Sir Ben Key says the behaviour will not be tolerated and is not a true reflection of what service life should be. He says anyone who is found to be culpable will be held accountable regardless of their rank or status. Octopus Energy will buy collapsed supplier Bulb, taking on its 1.5 million customers after the deal was given the green light by the government. Business Secretary Grant Shapps said the move brings vital reassurance and energy security to consumers. The sale is expected to be completed by the end of next month. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Angela.
Thanks, Alice. Now, the Northern Ireland Secretary, Chris Heaton-Harris, has said that there will be a snap Assembly election as early as next week, but he's not set an actual date. Now, this comes after politicians missed the deadline that was set by Westminster for restoring the devolved government, which hasn't actually functioned, remember, since May of this year. So what does all of this mean? Let's cross now to Stormont, where we can speak to GB News Northern Ireland reporter Dougie Beattie. Hi, Dougie.
How are you, Angela? And welcome to Stormont. It is a very wet and windy building at the minute. It's grounds. The building behind me is now no MLAs in it whatsoever, no ministers, because on midnight on Thursday night into Friday morning, that legislation came into place. And it is legislation that all the parties signed up to, that if there was no government in place 24 weeks after an election, that it would be disbanded and new elections were to take place. So Chris Heaton-Harris, the Secretary of State, did exactly that, but he did it after a threat. He could have continued that legislation. He could have got an extension on it for a short while, but he decided in his first outing as the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland to stand with Simon Coveney, the Irish Foreign Affairs Minister, because of course the DUP refused to come into government because of the protocol. They left this in February. They stood on an electoral mandate of not coming in unless the protocol was settled, and they agreed with Liz Truss that this legislation would go through the House of Westminster, then into the House of Lords, back into Westminster, and would be agreed to shut down the protocol in some ways if the EU did not take part in it. So this is what Chris Heaton-Harris had to say yesterday.
Firstly, this is a really serious situation. As of a minute past midnight last night, there are no longer ministers in office in the Northern Ireland Executive. Now, I will take limited but necessary steps to ensure public services do continue to run and to protect the public finances. But there's a limit to what the Secretary of State can do in these circumstances. I also want to address those who've talked about joint authority. It's something that we will simply not consider. It's not based on the consent mechanism that is threaded through the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. So we are where we are. I have limited options ahead of me. I'm under a legal duty to call an election within 12 weeks. I've had lots and lots of talks with all the parties and will continue to do so. And that I hear it when parties say that they really do not want an election at all. But nearly all of them are parties who signed up to the rules, the law that means I need to call an election.
Well, you can hear from Chris Heaton-Harris there. He is slightly miffed with what's gone on because they tried to bounce the DUP into power, almost threatening them with an election. And to their horror, the DUP said, well, that's OK. We stood on this mandate. We can't get down from it. So we're happy with it. And he also pointed to those that also tried to put their frighteners on by saying, oh, well, that joint authority would be in place. He has totally denied that that will happen. And then he spoke again, and this is what he had to say.
I completely understand that the big impasse for one of the unionist community is what is going on with the protocol. But as I continually say, the atmosphere in those talks has completely changed in recent weeks. And I am, as I said at the very top of this, an optimist, and I really do believe we can get somewhere on those too.
Okay, thanks, folks. Thanks very much.
Doogie, we heard Heaton Harris saying there that the feeling he gets is that neither of the main parties actually wants an election. And in the next hour of the programme today, I'm going to be talking to Baroness Kate Hoey and to the MP Emma Little-Pengelly to get a sort of political perspective on this. But where do you see this all going?
Well, if it goes to an election, it will become that Sinn Féin will turn it into a border poll and that the UP will have it with unionists. But this is really an EU problem. This is to protect the integrity of a single market. It's about the EU not trusting the Irish to bring in goods that are into Great Britain from other trade deals that have been done, repackaged and put them into the EU. So you could actually say, if the Irish government are so sure there's nothing wrong with the protocol, it might end up that they have a protocol going into the EU to have their own goods checked.
Well, we'll have to wait and see, won't we? And certainly it looks as if there is going to be an election there, so it is still all up in the air, isn't it? Doogie, thanks ever so much. That's Doogie Beattie, GB News Northern Ireland reporter. Now, you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends with me, Angela Rippon. We've got plenty more still to come this afternoon, including a source at the Manston military base in Kent claims that violence, disease and attempts at self-harm are a daily occurrence at the facility. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, has an exclusive report coming up next. But first, we're going to take a quick break.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank and, of course, fun every Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
On Mark Dolan tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me from 9 p.m. to midnight every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 18 minutes to 1 and you are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends on GB News with me, Angela Rippon. Now, at least 12 small boats containing migrants have crossed the English Channel so far today, with more than 500 people taken to Dover. Now, they're going to be transferred to the processing centre at the Manston military base in Kent, and it comes as a whistleblower at that troubled centre has told GB News that the government is not acknowledging the true extent of the crisis there. The source at Manston military base claims violence, disease and attempts at self-harm are a daily occurrence at the facility. The processing centre is only supposed to hold asylum seekers for no more than 24 hours before they're transferred to longer-term accommodation. But many have been there weeks in unsuitable living conditions. Well, our Home and Security editor, Mark White, has this exclusive report.
The situation inside this asylum processing centre is deteriorating rapidly, according to one man who works here. We're protecting his identity, but this whistleblower told us officials are not acknowledging the true extent of the crisis here.
Incidents are being brushed under the carpet and not taken seriously. Weapons that have been found include knuckle dusters, knives, makeshift weapons that could slash or stab people.
He also said some of those employed to guard the base were later revealed to have no right to work in the UK. The Home Office told us they're not aware of anyone employed at the base who didn't have a right to work there. The processing centre is only supposed to hold asylum seekers for no more than 24 hours before they're then farmed out to hotels and other longer-term, more suitable accommodation. But the numbers arriving by small boat far outstrip the base's processing capabilities.
Senior management don't have plans to move them out. Their solution is to bail them onto the site. They've breached detention laws and human rights. When someone is detained, they should be reviewed every 24 hours. This has not been done at all.
He told us some people have been there for over a month, adding to the mounting tensions and worsening conditions at the base.
Diphtheria has been confirmed, as has strep throat, sandflies and fleas throughout the tents. Migrants pelted staff with water bottles, injuring one member of staff. Migrants have self-harmed, and one attempted to hang himself. Most staff aren't trained to deal or cope with this.
We need to process applications here when people do arrive in this country much more quickly. Wherever you look with this government, it's a story of failure and lack of leadership.
The whistleblower said staff at Manston have also now been told to classify those at the base as arriving passengers and not illegal entrants. He fears it will only be a matter of time before there is serious disorder here.
Critical incidents have been declared. There are regular escape attempts, sit-down protests, threats of a dirty protest, fighting amongst migrants and assaults on staff.
A Home Office spokesperson said the record numbers arriving by small boat continue to put the asylum system under incredible pressure, but Manston remains resourced and equipped to process migrants. Alternative accommodation will be provided as soon as possible. Mark White, GB News.
Some pretty disturbing stuff there from Mark. Well, meanwhile, the Express newspaper, and I think also the Times today, is saying that Rishi Sunak and Macron have actually been talking to each other and as a result have come up with an agreement to curb channel crossings. As I understand it, what they're going to say is that the deal will give France extra money for drones and guarantees of a minimum number of police officers patrolling the beaches. And they're also aiming to double the proportion of people who are attempting to cross the channel to at least 80% of them, to actually stop them at source. Well, we'll have to wait and see what happens there, but at least after that report from Mark, I think very interesting material there. Now, thousands of people today are going to take to the streets in cities across the UK in the March of the Mummies. It's a protest targeting government reform on childcare, parental leave and flexible working. Protesters are being encouraged to dress up as mummies in Halloween costumes while marching with more than 10,000 who are expected to join in the 11 national demonstrations. Joining me now is GB News national reporter Theo Chikomba.
Yes, good afternoon from here in central London, just opposite Parliament Garden, well, just behind me, Parliament Square Garden, just behind me, where thousands of people have been here since the early hours of this morning here in this march. And the point they want to prove here today, they say people should be taking them seriously about pay. This is particularly mothers and those who are pregnant as well. And just to highlight their cause, they're saying from latest ONS figures, it says that around 13% of women who are between 24 and 35 are left out of work at the moment, and that's due to a number of reasons. They want more flexibility, better pay, and of course protection when they do start beginning to plan a family. And earlier today we heard from the founder Jolie, and this is what she had to say.
I want to talk directly to Rishi Sunak. We know that he's an ambitious Prime Minister. We want him to be ambitious for women as well. We know that he's got a really difficult job on his hands at the moment, but it is critical and urgent that he invests in the childcare sector, because we're seeing a mass exodus of women from the workforce, and that is really bad for the economy. We've got a skills crisis on our hand. We need those women in the workforce, but it's also really bad for families. We've got a cost of living crisis at the moment, and women are being forced to leave the labour market because they can't afford to work. So we need a functioning, good quality, affordable childcare sector. We also need parental leave to be enough so that people can actually survive on it. It's £156 a week. That's 47% of the national minimum wage. We're hearing from women that are having to return to work after a number of weeks after having a baby, when they're not fully healed, when they haven't had a chance to bond with their children. And this will cause enormous problems for our future. But it also means that many children are being born into poverty.
Now, it's not just mothers, it's women who are pregnant here alongside their husbands, friends, family, all here in London. And here are just some of the things that they want to see going forward. They want good quality childcare, which is affordable, an increase in provision to those with a child who has a disability, and investment in the UK childcare system. So those are just a few things which they've been highlighting today. Today, just behind me on the platform, they've had a number of speakers who've been here, they've been cheering, they've been singing, and they've been, chanting a few things as well. And just some of the placards. One interesting one we saw this morning said, if you invest in our womb, you can invest in the economy and see it boom. So that's here in central London, and they'll be here for the next few hours.
Thanks very much indeed. That's the GB News national reporter, Theo Chikomba, covering the March of the Mummies. Now, the cost of living crisis is here for the long haul, and families across the country are certainly struggling to beat the squeeze and make ends meet. Essentials like food, fuel and staying warm during the colder months are becoming even more difficult to afford. So just to put it into context, let's take a look at what's happened to food inflation. It's at 14% at the moment, which I think most families would have noticed when they get to the checkouts at the supermarket. So how can we help you at home to save pennies? Well, joining me now is Lynn Beattie. She's also known as Mrs. Mummy Penny and has well over 15,000 followers on social media, where she shares all of her best tips to help you save money, and she's going to share some of them with us right now. So thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. Just start by giving us, people are worried about putting food on the table. What are the sort of things we can do to ensure that we get the best value for our money for food?
Yeah. Hi, Angela. Thanks for having
me.
Food is the best place to start, because when I talk through different cost savings, I start with food, water and shelter, because if you don't have those three things, then we can't survive. So that's where budgeting has to start, with food. So, and also I don't want to say that I'm not teaching people to suck eggs. I just want to demonstrate that I have been in a really precarious position. I've been in a lot of debt in the past. So I have been in that position where I've put food on credit cards to feed my children. So I know where people are at the moment. But I think the basic things with food is basic. It is going back to basics. It's thinking about what you used to do when you're growing up with your mum or with your grandparents. It's cooking stuff from scratch. It's getting things when they're in season. It's getting it's the Super 6 deals in the cheaper supermarkets. It's almost like adjusting your food every week, because you have to focus on the stuff that's cheap in the shops each week. Like at the moment, there's apples everywhere, so that we can forage, that are in boxes outside people's houses. So what can we do with apples? Maybe we can use those apples to make some chutney as free Christmas presents for Christmas coming up as well. So we are having to be very inventive about the ways that we're doing things, and things like takeaways. They're having to be cut out. It's fakeaways now. It's not takeaways. We can't afford that kind of option anymore.
Yeah, and we've also got to cut down on food wastage, haven't we? Can I just give you one of my little tips? I found these green bags advertised in one of the sort of national kitchen suppliers, and they're absolutely fantastic because you can put just about any kind of fruit or vegetable in them, and they last at least twice as long. And so cutting down on waste is important, isn't it?
Yeah. And another little thing you can do is if you put a little bit of kitchen roll in a bag of salad leaves or spinach leaves, it prolongs the life as well. I don't understand the science, but it definitely works. So food waste, it's one of my bugbears. I absolutely hate it. But what I will say is, and it's more difficult with the reduced aisle stuff in shops now because they go very quickly. But if you can get there at the right time, which is later in the evening, a lot of the stuff in the reduced section, you can pop it in your freezer. So vegetables, fruits, they can go in your freezer, milk, cheese, like all this stuff that I didn't know about years ago, but it can all be frozen. Cheap ready meals. It's just stuff to stash away for emergencies and where you're saving a lot of money.
Yeah, we've all got to think about it a lot more when we go to the supermarket, haven't we? What about where energy is concerned? Because I know that's the big worry for a lot of people, paying their bill. Now, maybe Mother Nature is going to help out here by giving us a nice mild winter if the temperatures we've been seeing in the weather forecast are anything to go by. But it is still a big problem for a lot of people, isn't it?
It's a huge problem, and that's it's probably like people are worried about their food, people are worried about their mortgage and their rent, and then they're worried about energy bills. That's the order of when we've done some research with Vodafone, which I'm working with at the moment. So with energy, okay, so there's an element of energy which is a standing order, as in you just have to pay it. And then there's an element of your energy bill that you can control, that you can, that if you use less energy, you will spend less on your bill. So what I will say with energy is the big things to focus on that are going to make the really big difference are reducing the temperature of your flow, your boiler. So putting that down to 70 is going to have a big impact on your gas bills. And also just putting your thermostat down by like a couple of degrees. Like if you were used to maybe having your thermostat on at 24 last year, which is what I've seen, it's about normal, that can go down to 22, that can go down to 20, and just put a scarf and a jumper on and heat yourself rather than the room. But those three things I've said there will have such a big impact on your gas bill, which is the thing which is going to cost a lot of money in the winter. So, and I'm not teaching people to suck eggs, but actually the flow thing on your boiler, not a lot of people know that, and it has a really big impact on your bill.
Yeah, and I think I saw somewhere that OVO, one of the energy companies, is giving away to people in real need electric blankets. So that's worth looking into. And today, actually, we heard that the Ofcom, I think, Ofcom were saying that people can actually get what are called now. I'm just trying to remember what they're actually called. They're the special rates for people who are on all sorts of benefits, who can actually get a cheaper rate for their broadband, but they don't always advertise it. Virgin do, but you should look at that as well because you could save quite a lot of money from that, couldn't you?
Yeah, so Vodafone have a social tariff for broadband and a social tariff for mobile. Okay, so if we do not have internet at home, we are not going to be able to search for deals on our essential bills, are we? We're not going to be able to save money on our shopping for Christmas if we can afford to even do that this year. So internet is an absolutely essential bill. So for a telco company to give us £12 a month for broadband, £10 a month for mobile, that's amazing, like value, and that is for people on benefits, okay. But it's all sorts of benefits. It's job seekers, it's pension credits, it's all the benefits. So
it's really worth looking for it, then, isn't it, Lynn? It really is. So thanks very much indeed for that. Some great tips there for saving money. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends with me, Angela Rippon, and we've got lots more coming up on the show this afternoon, including more on that all-important snap election in Northern Ireland. Will there be an Assembly election? But what actually happens between now and then? But first, we're going to take a quick break.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking wet across many central and some western areas, but mostly fine elsewhere. Let's take a look at the details. The north of Scotland will stay dry with some sunshine. It will turn breezy, but temperatures will reach a mild 15 Celsius, 59 Fahrenheit. rain will affect more southern parts of Scotland. And Northern Ireland will also be shrouded in thicker cloud with some rain at times, accompanied by quite a keen and gusty wind. A similar setup is expected across the north of England, and though here the rain should begin to ease a little from the south. There'll still be some showery weather across the north of Wales and a sometimes brisk wind too, but skies will be trying to brighten up and temperatures will widely be in the upper teens. The weather's looking a lot quieter across the East Midlands. It will be a dry afternoon and it will feel quite warm thanks to some hazy sunshine and despite the southerly breeze. The sunshine looks more prolonged across East Anglia with less cloud around, and the wind will be that bit lighter, making for quite a warm afternoon for this time of year. It will be a dry afternoon across southern England as well, and in the sunshine, temperatures could nudge into the low 20s Celsius, which is around the 70 Fahrenheit mark. Rain will move into northern Scotland this evening. Elsewhere, there'll be clear spells and 1 or 2 showers, and that's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News. And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
On radio
and online.
we're proud to be
The People's Channel, Britain's
News channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Every Saturday at 2 o'clock, join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain. I'm not afraid to give you a platform and say it how it is.
Come on, make the case. Something like this is very, very important to people.
And we're always up for a laugh on this show.
God, honestly, you'd think there were no problems in the world.
Real Britain, every Saturday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Hello and welcome. If you've just joined us, it's just coming up to 1 minute past 1. I'm Angela Rippon and I'm with you until 2 o'clock this afternoon, keeping you company on both television and radio. Now there's plenty more still to come, including more on our top discussion today, politics at home. How has Rishi Sunak fared in his first week as Prime Minister? Plus the upcoming elections in Northern Ireland, and all of that, plus the enduring popularity of the Oasis song Wonderwall, as it's named as the most listened to hit of the 70s, 80s and 90s. But first, let's get the latest news with Alice Porter.
Good afternoon. It's just gone 1 o'clock. I'm Alice Porter in the GB newsroom. A whistleblower at an asylum processing centre in Kent has told GB News the government is not acknowledging the true extent of the crisis there. The worker at the Manston military base claims violence, disease and attempts of self-harm are a daily occurrence at the facility. The processing centre is only supposed to hold asylum seekers for no more than 24 hours before transferring them on to longer-term accommodation. But many have allegedly been there weeks in unsuitable living conditions. Former Chief Immigration Officer Kevin Saunders says the problem lies with the legislation.
80% of people coming across the channel are from Albania. And we do have legislation, of course, that we can remove them. However, and here's the problem, the people that advise these refugees are saying, just say to the UK authorities that you've been trafficked, because once you've said that, they can't remove you.
While at least 12 small boats carrying 500 people have been intercepted crossing the English Channel so far today, authorities are still actively responding to other sightings. Border Force vessels and lifeboats are taking them to Dover. They'll then be transferred to the Manston military base for processing. The head of the Royal Navy has ordered an investigation into what he's called abhorrent allegations of sexual assault and harassment in the submarine service. Admiral Sir Ben Kay says the behaviour will not be tolerated and is not a true reflection of what service life should be. He says anyone who's found to be culpable will be held accountable, regardless of their rank or status. Octopus Energy will buy collapsed supplier Bulb after the deal was given the green light by the government. Octopus says it's paying the government above market value to take on the company's 1.5 million customers. Business Secretary Grant Shapps says the move brings vital reassurance and energy security to consumers across the country at a time when they need it most. The deal is expected to be completed by the end of next month. The Foreign Secretary says countries need to work together to starve terrorists of money and technology. Addressing a United Nations meeting in India, James Cleverly urged allied states to tackle terror groups' use of technology to recruit and radicalise people. He called for more pressure to be put on big tech companies.
We're also working with the G7 and Global Internet Forum to counter terrorism. And we continue to press tech companies, amongst whom are some of the Internet's biggest players, to crack down even harder on extremist content online.
Russia has declared the end of its Ukraine mobilization campaign. The defense minister told President Putin that the target of 300,000 people had been met and they will now stop deploying reservists to fight. The controversial move led to tens of thousands of Russian men fleeing the country. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says he doubts Moscow is done with calling up soldiers. Thousands of mothers are demonstrating across the country, demanding reforms to childcare. The Halloween-themed protest called the March of the Mummies is calling for urgent progress on women's rights. They say expensive childcare and poor paternity benefits are pushing mothers out of the workforce and into poverty. They want the government to increase funding for the sector. Beth is a mum marching in central London.
And unfortunately, when I go back to work, I basically will be giving my entire salary over to my childcare costs. So essentially, it's not worth me going back to work. But I want to go back to work and I want to be part of the workforce and I love my job and I don't want to take a career break. But unfortunately, I will have peanuts to survive on, which is really difficult when you want to spend time with your daughter, do fun things, and there's just not enough money.
Railway staff in Scotland are staging a 24-hour walkout over a pay dispute. More than 2,000 members of the RMT union are striking, and passengers are being warned to expect widespread disruption. ScotRail say the latest offer gives the lowest paid staff a basic pay increase of almost 7.5%. But the union is calling for a rise that's more in line with inflation. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now let's get back to Angela.
Thanks, Alice. Well, Lettuce Bromowski is still with me here in the studio to discuss all the politics at home as Rishi Sunak's first week as Prime Minister has come to an end. In the programme tomorrow, Lettuce, we're going to be taking a look at the in-tray that Sunak has got. He's going to have to deal with, let's say, he's going to have to deal with the unions, with the NHS, with pensions, with energy. I mean, it's such a massive amount that he's got to deal with. Is it too much for him to cope with? I mean, is he going to have to cut back on things?
Well, I mean, like we were discussing earlier, he's already cut back on things like not going to COP. He's staying at home. He's very much focusing on that. Already this week, we've seen a few sort of U-turns, if you want to call them that, on fracking, for example. He's reinstated the ban on fracking. That is just going back to the manifesto in 2019. However, it is changing back from Liz Truss. It's just sort of turning it on its head, and it is creating a few of those tensions. But he's trying to get a few things off his plate just to start with. I would say in his in-tray at the moment, the focus should be and must be on this energy crisis and the cost of living. We've been very lucky at the moment. The weather hasn't been too bad. People haven't had to really necessarily turn their heating too much. But that's going to all change very quickly, and people will immediately start struggling again.
But he's also got the unions to deal with. I mean, you say that he's got to deal with the cost of living, but for instance, not only are the trains going to keep going out on strike, or the train workers, but he's got the nurses' strike coming up, and there's a big problem, isn't there, labelled NHS.
Yes, there is a huge problem labelled NHS, and all of these areas, I would say, need reform. Think about the railways for a moment. People don't use the railways in the same way that we did before the pandemic. People just are not travelling to work as much. They don't need to commute. We've got this very flexible way of working. And so having these trains running all the time with no passengers on them is just not sustainable either. So there needs to be reform there. The NHS, there is no doubt that needs to be reformed. And I'm sure what we're going to see a lot of in this autumn budget, mini budget, whatever you want to call it, is these public spending cuts in these areas and entering into this stage of austerity, as it is being called at the moment.
But it's a very difficult line, isn't it? Because if he puts income tax up by too much, if he cuts by too much in public spending, people are going to say, no, we can't stand that. So he's not, well, he and Jeremy Hunt, they've got a very, very, very fine line before they actually drop off the cliff one side or the other, haven't they?
They've got a very fine line, and not only a fine line there, but also in the politics that's going on in the party. I think one thing that Bob Seeley, your guest you had on a moment ago, said, which I thought was so interesting, was this idea of all these different voices in the party. This is not the Communist Party, this is the Conservative Party. And although there are variations in these voices, that's where you get the best policies, that's where you get the best ideas from. They're variations around the same foundation of thought. And I think that that needs to be utilised so much more. There are areas that he's looking at, like expanding of the windfall tax. We know that Shell this week, you know, they said that they had made profits of 8 billion on a 30 billion profits for the year alone, and yet they hadn't paid anything in windfall tax.
But most of that profit, as they've said, is made abroad and not actually in this country. And the profit that they do have is what they're ploughing back into infrastructure, which is why they've avoided paying that tax up until now.
Well, exactly, but they are willing. The CEO came out and said that they're happy to pay a bit of income tax because they're making so much of this money, and they're happy to put it back into a sort of, happy is probably the wrong word here, but they're willing to contribute to a society so that maybe people aren't struggling so much.
Is that an answer, do you think, that perhaps we've had the wrong approach to big business where it comes to taxing them more on their profits, and that it takes somebody like Rishi Sunak, who after all was the Chancellor of the Exchequer and understands money, going in and saying, actually, rather like Shell, we need your money, please give it up willingly?
I would say it's a very fine line. Like we're saying, we do not want to start overtaxing these companies so they start moving abroad, because they've got the money, they've got the resources, they've probably got companies in other places where they can just move their locations to, move their factories to.
And not pay any tax at all.
And not pay any tax at all. And so that's the very fine line that they'll have to negotiate with these companies very seriously going forward.
But he has got to sort out the unions, he's got to sort out the nurses, hasn't he? I mean, it was all very well, that lovely 77-year-old lady yesterday saying...
That was very sweet. And she's now on the front pages somewhere.
They're not paying them
I know,
and
exactly.
She's right.
No, well, she is right. But again, everyone would love a pay rise in these times, and it's very difficult. You can't just be giving out money left, right and centre when we've got so many financial issues to deal with. And I think he did handle that situation quite well, you know. It's sort of every politician's nightmare to be called out live while you're sort of doing these runarounds. But
especially by an elderly lady.
Yeah, exactly. It's sort of like being told off by your mother.
Yeah.
But I do think it was so important that he's doing this and he's showing face and he's going around to these places. Boris Johnson, for all the communicator that he was, for all those characteristics, he wasn't really a man of the people, and you didn't see him walking around. Liz Truss was just not a communicator at all. Whereas Rishi's back out there talking to the people that matter. He's in these hospitals, I think it was the hospital in Croydon, talking to these people, and I think that is a first step, and it's very good that we've got a communicator like that back in place.
How much of a problem is his individual wealth going to be?
I think that it will never not go away. I think it'll be a conversation throughout his premiership. But I think
let's face it, Richie, the opposition is they're not cheap either. Keir Starmer is not not short of a bob, is he?
not even a little bit. No. And so I think it'll just always be one of those sore spots to press on. I don't think it's going to go much further. He has married very well, and he's also worked to earn his money. It's not like he's just inherited this from a very wealthy father somewhere. He knows what hard work is, and I think that that's important in this role.
It's very interesting, isn't it, that we've got Rishi Sunak now as the Prime Minister at his second attempt, as it were. We've got Jeremy Hunt, who failed against Boris Johnson.
Yeah.
Both of them desperately wanting to be Prime Minister. But actually, who would want to be a Prime Minister?
I couldn't agree with that more.
All of these problems.
You've got so many problems. Also, it's the most thankless job out there. They are constantly torn down by the media, constantly torn down by the opposition. There seems to be no part of the job in which you would want to be in there. And I think that that's something we've really, really got to change going forward. We want our MPs to be the people going out there who really want to be in the job, not people having it as a second or third job, not people doing it when they're older because, they've lived their life, they've earned their money, and now they want to give back. We want more young people going into these jobs, getting it from the get-go, and desiring to be a Prime Minister, because I think that's where you get the best Prime Ministers from, people who want to change it and have a desire to change it. But the media, the frenzy that's always around them, it's brutal, and it's unfair a lot of the time, I think.
We're going on now to talk about the situation in Northern Ireland. Now, as a political commentator, what is your take, before I talk to Kate Hoey and Emma Little-Pengelly about this, what is your take on the situation that's happening there? Can you see a game?
I completely sympathise with them. I think that the end game is that the protocol must be amended. We can do tinkering, for example. There should not be checks on goods moving between the UK and Northern Ireland. Those goods that are destined just for Northern Ireland rather than going further afield, that should be completely got rid of.
The basic problem is the government is saying, or the EU is saying, we don't trust you to put things into Northern Ireland and then not ship them over the border into the south.
Well, also, why should Northern Ireland trust Westminster? Why should they trust the British government here? I mean, we had Boris Johnson, who came out outright and said, over my dead body would we ever put a border in the Irish Sea.
And
look where we are today.
There it is.
And then you've got Liz Truss as well, who came out swinging, and that, I think, might have scared the EU a little bit, saying that she would change the rules, not break international law, but allow UK to unilaterally change these rules. And, well, she didn't last very long, so she wasn't able to implement that. So who knows where Rishi Sunak is going to go on this, but they need stability and they need confidence in the government.
Thank you for that, Lettuce, because I am now about to talk. That was political commentator Lettuce Bramomsky, but as I said at the top of the programme, the political situation in Northern Ireland has reached another crisis point, with the parties having failed to reach an agreement to restore the power-sharing government instalment. But what does that actually mean for the future of power-sharing in Northern Ireland? And so, Lettuce, thanks for your opinions there. But joining me now is the former Labour MP and independent peer, Baroness Kate Hoey. Thank you, Kate, so much for joining us today. Now, we've got Jeffrey Donaldson, who's the leader of the DUP, saying that he is not budging on the question of protocol. What is it going to take to break this deadlock, do you think? I mean, presumably, the election is a waste of time, really.
Yes, the election isn't going to solve anything. It will bring about more or less the same results, with the hardening of probably votes, more votes for the DUP and more votes for Sinn Féin on the other side, and some of the smaller parties being squeezed. Nothing will change about devolution until the protocol is sorted. I mean, the protocol, it's a bit like saying the people of Cornwall, you're going to be separated out from the rest of your country. You're going to have checks on anything that comes in, goods coming in with little masses of paperwork, extra costs, so that business actually says we're not sending it anymore to Northern Ireland. And that has meant a complete diversion of trade. And of course, the protocol, standing up against the protocol, was a mandate that the DUP had in the last election. And it's interesting because, of course, I'm sure viewers and listeners will remember that Sinn Féin brought the Assembly down for 3 years and there was no election. And the UK government didn't go and badger Sinn Féin every minute, whereas in the last week, the Secretary of State, I think probably not quite understanding the psyche of people in Northern Ireland, has spent his time, threatening, badgering, cajoling, and it isn't going to work because until the protocol is sorted, and I would say to the Secretary of State today and to the Minister of State, just go back and start getting real negotiations with the EU. They're not going to work, in my view, because the EU hasn't changed even its negotiating mandate. And then make sure that the protocol bill, which was designed by Liz Truss, but which had gone through the House of Commons and is now in the Lords, is pushed through so that we can take those independent decisions and not wait for the EU, because if we wait for the EU, we'll be here in another 5 years.
I mean, do you put any store at all by the fact that at the moment James Cleverly, who is the Foreign Secretary, and indeed the EU negotiator Markus Sefcovic, I think he is, that they are actually in discussions? Do you have any faith at all in anything that they are likely to come up with?
Well, we haven't really seen any real negotiations. What we've seen is what they call technical discussions. And that's all about, trying to slightly make, maybe instead of 20 forms to fill in when you're a business in Britain moving to Northern Ireland, you only have to fill in 5, or perhaps every other lorry won't be checked and all of that kind of thing. That doesn't change the fundamental constitutional position that Northern Ireland has been separated out, that we're still, as far as Northern Ireland are concerned now, Great Britain is a third country. It's a foreign country, and we are subject to EU rules and EU laws. And yet we had the same ballot paper. Yes, of course, there was a majority in Northern Ireland to stay in the European Union, as there was in Scotland, but it was a United Kingdom vote. We had the same ballot paper saying, do you wish to leave? And the United Kingdom voted to leave. We have not. We have been left in this kind of colony situation where we're half in and half out of our own country. And that makes people very, very angry. And I don't think the government, and Rishi Sunak really needs to get a grip of this. I know there's all these other important issues on energy and cost of living. But, if he believes in the union of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, if he believes in the union generally, then the stability in Northern Ireland is absolutely crucial. And we will not get that stability. We will not get devolution back until the protocol is sorted.
Yeah.
And, the Irish government has to be pressurised into realising that they have played along with the European Union. They have made the European Union even more keen to punish the United Kingdom for leaving. And it just is not acceptable to people in Northern Ireland.
No, and in fact, it's doing, as you say, huge damage to trade in Northern Ireland and to business in general. Very, very briefly, Kate, can I just ask you this? You're quoted as saying that you think that having this border between Britain and Northern Ireland is effectively an indictment on the government and a threat to peace and stability. Very briefly, do you think that actually it is going to lead to a breakdown in peace and stability?
Well, everything everyone has said is about supporting the Belfast Agreement. The Belfast Agreement, as Lord Trimble himself said, who helped write it, was fractured by the protocol. The Belfast Agreement is all about consent, and that has been broken. People of Northern Ireland have not a single unionist politician supports the protocol. So, obviously, many, many people have been doing so much to keep people, young people in particular, off the streets. But, the government has to realise that it's going to be a very difficult situation if there's another election, and it's going to be an even more difficult situation if the protocol isn't sorted.
Baroness Kate Hoey, thank you very much indeed for that. I'd like now to turn to our next guest, who is Emma Little-Pengelly. He's a former DUP MP and is now a member of the Legislative Assembly for Lagan. We've heard there what Kate Hoey is saying about what she thinks is wrong. I mean, can you see anything at all that is going to break this deadlock?
Well, I think there is a way to break the deadlock, and that is for the UK government to replace the protocol with a set of proposals that unionists in Northern Ireland can buy into. You've heard there from Baroness Hoey that there's not a single elected unionist MLA or MP from Northern Ireland that supports the protocol. So unionism is absolutely united on this, that the protocol needs to be replaced with something that restores Northern Ireland's place as part of the United Kingdom, particularly in relation to trade. You know, we do, as you've heard there, have this bizarre situation where, you know, if goods are being brought in from Great Britain for consumption in the restaurants or homes in Belfast or across Northern Ireland, if people are bringing in, for example, daffodil bulbs to be planted in another part of the United Kingdom here in Northern Ireland, then of course those goods have to undergo these huge checks before they can come across within our own internal trading market. So that is bad for Northern Ireland. You know, evidence before the House of Lords Committee last week, transport costs going up by 30% due to the paperwork and bureaucracy of bringing those goods over from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. Of course, Northern Ireland is only 3% of the entire of the United Kingdom, so we rely hugely on the rest of the United Kingdom for trade, for business, for goods. We're very much part of that single market. So, of course, these huge barriers, in our view, completely disproportionate because these goods are coming in and staying within the United Kingdom. There's no need for any checks on those whatsoever. But the big issue here is, of course, the problems have been highlighted now for 3 years. The UK government should be fully aware of what is required, what needs to be addressed about the protocol. And our message to our government, our UK government, is to get on with it and get these changes negotiated and agreed with the European Union. And the sooner that is done, then government can be restored in Northern Ireland. The big problem for us is that if government was restored, unionist ministers would be under a legal obligation to put in place some of these checks and processes that, in fact, day by day increases that barrier between us and the rest of the United Kingdom.
But Emma, I mean, I have to say, you put your finger on it there. The problem is that while that is the argument, in the meantime, there is no government in Northern Ireland. We're hearing heartbreaking stories about what is happening to the NHS and the people that cannot get treatment, cannot get operations. There is no government in the country. Where does this lead the future of Stormont and indeed power sharing?
Well, the UK government had been warned for some considerable time that this was going to cause instability. The DUP and other unionists went back into government in January of 2020 on the condition that the UK government was going to address these issues. We stayed in that government for 2 years, working that system while these negotiations were ongoing. Now, that didn't result in the changes that were required. In fact, the problems increased. The pressure was put on those unionist ministers to continue to implement this protocol, which is causing all of these fractures and instability. And the important thing to remember here as well is it's not the DUP that is saying that we're not going to do this, that we're unhappy with this. It's the people who vote for the DUP. It's tens of thousands of people across Northern Ireland who are deeply upset and unhappy with the current arrangements. It's 3 years after those were put in place, and they want their government, their UK government, to address this and restore and protect their part as part of this United Kingdom. Now, Northern Ireland receives what's called a block grant from the UK government. We receive a certain amount of money. There's only so much that we can do with that. We've heard from the Sinn Féin finance minister that, in fact, there's £660 million of a black hole in finances. That means that there isn't that surplus money, sadly. There's not that surplus money sitting up there for additional or new schemes to help people in this cost of living crisis. The people who can do that and who are doing that is the UK government and through Treasury. And we continue to work with Treasury. So the absence of a Northern Ireland Assembly, while not ideal, we want to get back there. We want the system to work. But it's not going to resolve those big issues, even if we were back tomorrow. And if we did come back in, quite frankly, the unionist people of Northern Ireland would be far from happy with the DUP. We wouldn't do that because we recognise that enough is enough. This has been talked about for 3 years. And if we don't get this addressed, European Union is saying these grace periods now need to end. The protocol must be fully implemented. We heard from the haulage companies last week in the House of Lords that if that were to happen, they suspect that supply chains to Northern Ireland would break down completely within 48 hours. That's what we're looking at. It's not rhetoric. It is serious. And unless we can get this changed, it's only going to cause significant instability in the years to come.
I think you've summed that up perfectly. Thank you very, very much indeed. Emma Little-Pengelly, former DUP MP and a member of the Legislative Assembly. Thank you so much for joining us. Plenty more to come this afternoon on Alastair Stewart and Friends with me, Angela Rippon. After the break, we're going to be getting an update from our Northern Ireland reporter on plans for that snap election. But first, let's take a look at the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking wet across many central and some western areas, but mostly fine elsewhere. Let's take a look at the details. The north of Scotland will stay dry with some sunshine. It will turn breezy, but temperatures will reach a mild 15 Celsius, 59 Fahrenheit. Rain will affect more southern parts of Scotland. And Northern Ireland will also be shrouded in thicker cloud with some rain at times, accompanied by quite a keen and gusty wind. A similar setup is expected across the north of England, and though here the rain should begin to ease a little from the south. There'll still be some showery weather across the north of Wales and a sometimes brisk wind too, but skies will be trying to brighten up and temperatures will widely be in the upper teens. The weather's looking a lot quieter across the East Midlands. It will be a dry afternoon and it will feel quite warm thanks to some hazy sunshine and despite the southerly breeze. The sunshine looks more prolonged across East Anglia with less cloud around, and the wind will be that bit lighter, making for quite a warm afternoon for this time of year. It will be a dry afternoon across southern England as well, and in the sunshine, temperatures could nudge into the low 20s Celsius, which is around the 70 Fahrenheit mark. Rain will move into northern Scotland this evening. Elsewhere, there'll be clear spells and 1 or 2 showers, and that's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
It's 1:30. I'm Alice Porter in the GB newsroom. A whistleblower at an asylum processing centre in Kent has told GB News the government is not acknowledging the true extent of the crisis there. The worker at the Manston military base claims violence, disease and attempts of self-harm are a daily occurrence at the facility. The processing centre is only supposed to hold asylum seekers for no more than 24 hours before transferring them to longer-term accommodation. But many have allegedly been there weeks in unsuitable living conditions. Meanwhile, at least 12 small boats carrying 500 people have been intercepted crossing the English Channel so far today. Authorities are still actively responding to other sightings. Border Force vessels and lifeboats are taking them to Dover. They'll then be transferred to the Manston military base in Kent for processing. Octopus Energy will buy Colette supplier Bulb, taking on its 1.5 million customers after the deal was given the green light by the government. Business Secretary Grant Shapps says the move brings vital reassurance and energy security to consumers. The sale is expected to be completed by the end of next month. Thousands of mothers are demonstrating across the country demanding reforms to childcare. The Halloween-themed protest, dubbed the March of the Mummies, is calling for urgent progress on women's rights. They say expensive childcare, along with poor maternity and paternity benefits, are pushing mothers out of the workforce and into poverty. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Angela.
Thank you, Alice. Well, the Northern Ireland Secretary, Chris Heaton-Harris, has said there will be a snap Assembly election as early as next week, but he has not set an actual date. Now, this comes after politicians missed the deadline that was set by Westminster for restoring a devolved government. The government there has not functioned since May of this year. So what does this all mean? Well, let's cross again to Stormont to speak to GB News Northern Ireland reporter Dougie Beattie.
Well, hello and welcome to Stormont. And yes, it is a building that is now entirely empty of politicians. On Thursday night, it came to the end of that legislative role where it was told 24 weeks from the last election it had to form a government, and it hasn't done so. Now, Chris Heaton-Harris tried to bounce the DUP into government by threats of an election, and to his horror, they obviously said that was OK. But he seems to have learnt from that mistake, and yesterday he spoke at a press conference, and this is what he had to say about unionists.
I completely understand that the big impasse for one of the unionist community is what is going on with the protocol. But as I continually say, the atmosphere in those talks has completely changed in recent weeks. And I am, as I said at the very top of this, an optimist. And I really do believe we can get somewhere on those two.
Okay, thanks, folks. Thanks very much.
Well, you could see from that he is now going to try and speak to unionists, which means that even in the talks in the EU, he's going to go back to Maros Sefcovic, the EU negotiator, and say, look, this didn't work, we're going to have to take a different route. But his biggest problem is actually going to be with Sinn Féin, because Sinn Féin are the largest party here in Northern Ireland, although not in government. They're also the largest party in the Republic of Ireland, where they're also not in government. If there was an election there tomorrow, they would be in government, and then whatever happens with the protocol, they would be held responsible for it. And let's not forget, the protocol is here to protect the integrity of the single market, the EU market. It is not beneficial to Britain. It's to stop goods going into the EU that don't meet those standards of the EU. It is basically the EU trying to protect its markets against rogue goods coming in from the Irish Republic. So the other option to that, of course, is checks on Irish goods going into the EU.
Thanks very much indeed, Dougie. And if you were listening earlier, you would have heard both Baroness Kate Hoey and Emma Little-Pengelly, who is a member of the DUP, just also, like Dougie, pointing out how very complex that whole situation is. Now, you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends with me, Angela Rippon. Plenty more still to come this afternoon, including the cost of living crisis is gripping the UK, with consumer prices continuing to rise dramatically. But apparently the stress and strains of paying bills is also taking its toll on the relationship in the homes. So we're going to be discussing all of that next. But first, let's take a quick break.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. And now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christie's. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's coming up to 20 minutes to 2 and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends on GB News with me, Angela Rippon. Now, you've been getting in touch on our big topic of the day, politics at home and Rishi Sunak's first week as PM. We've got an email from Chris who says, Rishi is obviously behind the times. An appointment with a GP, wish I could get one. While Wendy says, I wasn't a fan of Sunak, but I am pleasantly surprised by his performance so far. He has a calming air of authority, and his impressive performance in the Commons this week was very welcome. Safe to say, the Tories are back on track. Watch this space, Keir Starmer. Well, do keep your views coming in, and do subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are at GB News. Now, the cost of living crisis has had many negative effects, but none apparently more so than the strain that it's putting on romantic relationships. A new survey by the dating website Ashley Madison has revealed that 30% of their members no longer trust their partner because of 4 financial decisions that they've made, with 44% of women agreeing that they are less attracted to their partner as a result. And that's not the only astonishing result in this survey. Joining me now to discuss it further is Lucy Beresford, who is a psychotherapist and relationship expert. Lucy, good to have you with us. Can I just quote one of the figures here, one of the statements that really shocked me, that your report says, and I quote, 84% of members agree that having an affair is their way of taking care of their mental health and well-being. An affair can be a way to regain a sense of worth. What?
Yes, indeed. Well, most people assume that having an affair is all about improving your sex life. And whilst that might actually be a very compelling byproduct, for a lot of people, having an affair is a way in which they can show up in their life as the better version of themselves. And the very sad fact is that for a lot of couples, they can get into a bit of a groove, into a bit of a rut. And that can really spell the death knell of your relationship. You start not to trust your partner, you start not to feel desired by them or attractive. And as you highlighted in your introduction, the cost of living crisis is bringing an awful lot of pressure, an awful lot of stress into relationships. And when you get that, and when you get a situation, as you highlighted, where people don't trust their partner anymore, actually that sense of, who am I? Who do I want to be in this world? Actually, what people tend to do is they try to find that outside of their primary relationship. And that's what this report is really reflecting.
Are you sure it's not just an excuse for bad behaviour, that because things aren't going well, it's all right to bonk the neighbours?
That's a really interesting way of putting it. I wonder whether Ashley Madison ought to use that as a strapline. I think what's very telling about some other research that Ashley Madison brought out before the pandemic was that for a number of people, having an affair is actually their way to stay married, that actually it makes a lot of the stresses and the strains actually more bearable. They feel more tolerant of things that are maybe not acceptable to them within their partnership. And it also allows them to maybe show up as a better parent. And these, as you say, are findings that people find incredibly counterintuitive. They feel that if you're in a relationship, then presumably you either love your partner, and if you didn't love your partner, you'd be off out the door. But actually, what this kind of research suggests is that people are making much more nuanced decisions about their relationship and whether they stay in it and how they stay in it. And again, going back to the cost of living or even the cost of loving crisis, as I see you're putting on the strap line below me, it's that sense that right now there is so much stress, so much tension within couples. How are people managing that for themselves? What we saw in the pandemic is that people who historically might have been able to go into the workplace, meet with friends, go to play football with their mates, or go to the cinema with someone else, you didn't have that extra external energy that you could bring back into your relationship and nourish it. People spent too much time with their loved ones so that they ended up not being their loved ones anymore. And we're just seeing that amplified with the cost of living crisis, because people are cancelling their gym memberships, they're not going out to restaurants with their friends, they're not going on holidays. So you've got that added microscope pressurising couples.
Well, I can quite see, I mean, the cost of living would put extra pressure onto people, but is it genuinely then a relationship that has a firm foundation to it if they can't talk to each other about money and their money worries?
Well, I'm a psychotherapist, so this is the meat and drink of the work that I do. It's about having conversations with yourself and working out what you want and what works in your life and what your goals and aspirations are. But also it's about the conversations that you have with your partner, that actually, if you do communicate, and as you can imagine, I have a lot of people who come to see me saying, oh, I communicate with my partner all the time. They just never listen to me. They just never hear. So you can talk to your partner, but are you actually on receive mode? Are you actually communicating as opposed to just talking at each other? Or are you choosing those wrong, inappropriate moments to have a conversation? You know, just as you arrive at the supermarket, you drop some bombshell moment about some topic that you want to discuss. Are you setting aside time with your loved one, with your partner, to actually have conversations about how do we deal with the cost of living crisis? What are your attitudes to money? What are your attitudes to fidelity? Because very few people go on their first or their second date and throw that at their first, the person they're having a drink with. But by the time you've had 6 or 7 dates, or maybe by the time you've been dating for 6 or 7 months, is that the moment at which you bring up the subject of fidelity or what would constitute cheating or a betrayal? We forget to have these conversations with each other, and that's where the danger lies.
Clearly we do. It's a fascinating survey. Lucy, thank you very much indeed for telling us about it. Lucy Beresford there, who is a psychotherapist and relationship expert. Now, after 46 years, one of Britain's favourite cars is going to be discontinued. Ford Motors announced this week that by the end of June 2023, they will have produced their last ever Ford Fiesta. And they're going to be moving their focus to electric cars instead. Now, in response to that news, nostalgic Britons have been sharing their love of the Ford Fiesta with our reporter, Ellie Costello.
Once upon a time, there was a car. It wasn't a big car, not a fancy car, but a car for the people.
It's the end of the road for one of Britain's favourite cars. The Ford Fiesta will cease production next year. But for many people in Britain, the car evokes special memories.
When I was 5, 6 and living with my mum, who was a single parent at the time, couldn't afford much. So the option was a Ford Fiesta. And at the time they were peanuts, and yeah, they were just economical, cheap to run, and it allowed her to do things that she wouldn't have been able to do if it wasn't for that car. So obviously learning to drive for the first time, buying my first ever new car was a Fiesta, meeting my girlfriend at the time, now fiance, in a Fiesta with her Fiesta, and just, yeah, again, travelling around Europe in this as well.
And did you and your girlfriend, when you first met, did you bond over the fact you both had Fiestas?
Yes, it was actually at a car meet, and yeah, I actually I wouldn't have gone up if it wasn't for a friend at the time who also had a Fiesta. So yeah, I met her for the first time, and we locked eyes and pretty much started talking straight away. And yeah.
So really, your love story is down to the Ford Fiesta.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's been a mate through my life. It really has. And I can't name any other car that would do that.
Ford says this move is about cost saving and the transition to electric vehicles. Erin Baker is from Auto Trader.
It's come as a bit of a shock to some, but the reasons for others are clear. Ford, like every other manufacturer out there, is having to pivot quite quickly to electric because 2030 is on the horizon, which is the cut-off date for sales of new petrol and diesel cars. So that's one big reason. And, you know, Ford, along with everyone else, has to look at the viability of its small models, its petrol and diesel models, look at the profitability, and if there is any future for them. And I think they've decided with Fiesta, probably rightly, that there just isn't a profit there in the future.
As a self-confessed petrol head, Chris doesn't think this is the right move.
I don't think electric is the way forward. I think it's hydrogen or synthetic fuel, which has been already proven to be a great alternative to petrol.
Despite being adored by so many, after almost half a century, it's time to say a fond farewell to the Ford Fiesta. Ellie Costello, GB News.
And I don't think Chris is the only one who has happy memories of the Ford Fiesta. So joining me now to discuss this further is the motoring journalist and transport campaigner, Quentin Wilson. Quentin, I'm sure Chris is absolutely right there. We've all got very happy memories of the old Ford Fiesta, haven't we?
We have, and it was one of those great Ford cars that delivered in spades. It handled beautifully, it was light, it was agile, and it made cars like the Mini and the Metro and some of those pretty woeful Fiat seem really dated at a stroke. So yeah, we adored it, absolutely. And my son learnt to drive on one. It was his first car, and they've become like a kind of social monument. We look back on these cars. Our Angela was the Cortina, and you mark your life out with these motoring milestones. So it's sad to see it go.
Yeah, was Chris also right that in fact it's wrong for all the manufacturers to be putting everything into electric cars for all sorts of reasons?
Well, I think he's wrong on the synthetic fuels and the hydrogen. Synthetic fuel still means that we burn stuff and there are emissions, and hydrogen for small cars, passenger cars, isn't viable, too expensive, and it requires, you know, lots of carbon emissions. You've just got to look at the sales. In September, Angela, I mean, the Fiesta was number 6 in the all-important September sales chart in the UK with 4,500 units. People want to buy crossovers now, which is a cross between a saloon car and a 4x4. And those are really very popular. So you've got the Nissan Qashqai at number 1 in the sales charts. And then in second place is the Tesla Model Y, which is an electric 4x4. Now, that sold 9,000 units compared to the Fiesta's 4,500. So the market is saying to Ford, look, we don't really want these little cars anymore. We want family crossovers and we want electric.
Even though in many parts of the country, and certainly in very large cities, the infrastructure is not there for recharging the things.
Yeah, it's coming. But I mean, 80% of people charge at home, Angela, you know.
But that's all right if you've got a drive or you can do it, but not if you live in an apartment block and not if you live in a terrace where your house opens up onto the street. You can't run the cables over the pavement, can you?
Absolutely, but that will come. That's not a huge technological problem. I mean, there are cables that run into the pavement with covers and they emerge on the curb, so you just plug it in. So that's not the barrier to entry. The barrier to entry really at the moment is cost. And we need to get the price of electric cars down, and we need to get the price of charging down and reduce the VAT on it and make it as cheap as filling up with diesel and petrol. So it is coming, and the market across Europe says this. It says that we don't want small cars anymore. We want crossovers, and ideally we want electric crossovers.
Quentin, thanks ever so much. Quentin Wilson there, motoring journalist. I just hope I hope they reintroduce a vehicle that is called the Fiesta, because it's got a rather lovely thought to it, hasn't it? Like the name. Now, the Oasis hit Wonderwall has been named the most streamed song of the 70s, 80s and 90s. The anthem has shot to the top with 281 million streams since records began, whilst Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody closely followed in second place with 248 million. And Toto's Africa came in at number 3. Now, despite missing out on the top spot, Queen were nevertheless the band that had the most songs on the list, with 13 of them. And joining me now is UK artist manager and music industry veteran Nick Stewart. Nick, you've had a long and very successful career in the music industry. How surprised were you that Wonderwall came out on top?
Not at all, actually. I think one ought to try and weave some links between these top 10 songs. Each act has its own constituency in terms of followers and people who've put them up in the charts and built a very strong following for the live work. And several of them have had then songs that have kicked out of that following and become anthems for other reasons. And Oasis's Wonderwall is one of those songs, as is another song on this list, Don't Stop Believing by Journey. Because most people who know that song couldn't name another song by Journey. In the case of Oasis, Wonderwall is a very simple song with a lovely acoustic guitar beginning. It builds up, it's anthemic, it ends up with some lovely strings at the back, and it's a song about being a pillar, a friend to somebody when they really need it. So lyrically, it has a strong emotional pull. It's a very simple tune. It's been covered many times before, by other artists. And the link with some of these tunes in this top 10 are that they've kicked well beyond the fan base of the artist concerned.
Yeah, I mean, it was a 1995 hit, wasn't it? So is it being rediscovered by a whole new generation?
Great songs, Angela, I think, live on and get transposed from one generation to the other. The other big news this week is that the Beatles album Revolver has been reissued in a deluxe format, 63 tracks. And one or two journalists, music journalists, notably Dan Kearns in the Sunday Times, for example, said that he thought Revolver was the great Beatles album of all time, even bigger than Sgt. Pepper or Abbey Road. And I think he might be right. Yeah. So people now, a whole new generation, will rediscover what made Revolver great. And I think great songs continue to roll over. And in terms of streaming, there's another factor, which is TV, radio, and TV, cinema, and TV advertising. So take another example. Running Up That Hill by the great Kate Bush suddenly emerged from being quite a dormant tune, placed on Stranger Things, the very successful TV series, and has rocketed up to being one of the best-selling stream tracks in the last year. And she's number 20 on this chart. So that's another area that helps to reinvent songs and keep them alive. But Wonderwall is a very, very fine song. Very simple song, brilliant delivery by Liam Gallagher, and will be played as long as songs are played.
Now, one thing I do have to ask you very briefly, of course, I mean, you've seen so many changes in your career in the music industry. One of the big ones is, of course, that vinyl is coming back. And there is something very tactile, isn't there, about going into a record shop and going through all of those albums, picking out the album, looking at the picture on the front of it, seeing all the notes on the back. You can't beat that, really, though, can you?
Well, there is a whole generation of people who are able just to click on their computers and download songs they want to listen to. But vinyl has made a comeback. In fact, all these reissues and deluxe versions, the one I've just mentioned, Revolver, will all be on vinyl in vinyl box sets. And actually, truth to tell, for many people who grew up with it, vinyl actually sounds better. It sounds warmer.
You're absolutely right.
There is a sonic capacity to it as well as...
It really does. Nick, thank you so much. That was UK artist manager Nick Stewart. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today. I'm going to be back tomorrow, and there'll be politics, of course, but I'm also going to be telling you how to make the perfect pumpkin soup as we look ahead to Halloween. But for today, from all of us, thank you for your company. Bye-bye.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking wet across many central and some western areas, but mostly fine elsewhere. Let's take a look at the details. The north of Scotland will stay dry with some sunshine. It will turn breezy, but temperatures will reach a mild 15 Celsius, 59 Fahrenheit. Rain will affect more southern parts of Scotland. And Northern Ireland will also be shrouded in thicker cloud with some rain at times, accompanied by quite a keen and gusty wind. A similar setup is expected across the north of England, and though here the rain should begin to ease a little from the south. There'll still be some showery weather across the north of Wales and a sometimes brisk wind too, but skies will be trying to brighten up and temperatures will widely be in the upper teens. The weather's looking a lot quieter across the East Midlands. It will be a dry afternoon and it will feel quite warm thanks to some hazy sunshine and despite the southerly breeze. The sunshine looks more prolonged across East Anglia with less cloud around, and the wind will be that bit lighter, making for quite a warm afternoon for this time of year. It will be a dry afternoon across southern England as well, and in the sunshine, temperatures could nudge into the low 20s Celsius, which is around the 70 Fahrenheit mark. Rain will move into northern Scotland this evening. Elsewhere, there'll be clear spells and 1 or 2 showers, and that's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin,